everybody. This week we're going to be talking about Much Ado About Nothing. This is a play about words and their multiple meanings. It's a play about misunderstandings and misrepresentations. Some characters are masters of words and have fantastically quick wits, and others do their best. They aim for it and they fall short in their attempts, and their words get the better of them. As all comedies, it moves from chaos to order and ends with marriage, but not without many near misses and mix-ups along the way. A super fun note, the title of this play is a triple pun. It, of course, means Much Ado About Nothing. Everybody freaks out about nothing. But also, number two, in early modern English, it could be pronounced noting instead of nothing. And so it's Much Ado About Noting or overhearing, which is definitely true in this play. And number three, nothing was a crass term for the female genitalia. So man was a thing and a woman was a no thing. And so it means much ado about the extraordinary fuss that men make over women's chastity. Amazing, right? Amazing. Let's move on. Background and sources. All right, so Much Ado About Nothing was first published in 1600, and our first recorded performance is in 1598. It is set in Messina, which is a port town off the island of Sicily, so it is set in Italy. And it's one of the few plays that Shakespeare wrote where the majority of the text is written in prose. It is one of Shakespeare's most popular comedies, for sure. And when you look at the sources, there are no direct sources for Beatrix and Benedick, but there were certainly at the time many, foes turned lovers to be inspired by, certainly. Even, I think nowadays that's a fun thing people are into. And they're definitely the prototypes later on for Restoration comedy after the Puritans shut down the playhouses. And then when they finally get back open again, there's new comedy later on in new genres. They're definitely the forerunners of the witty lovers, definitely. As far as Hero and Claudio, the falsely accused lady is a very, very old plot, and it too was kind of coming back and becoming popular in the Renaissance. But you could see this plot in either comedies or tragedies. You definitely see different endings for the woman in those. Moving on. Questions to consider. I know you've already seen these, but to touch on them again, the play begins with men, returning from war. How does this affect their behavior throughout the play? What does it mean to be a man in the context of this play? What do the men think that means? What do the women think that means? And are they the same? Two, what is Shakespeare telling us about ourselves, about what we want or what we need to be happy about how men and women interact? And three, are Beatrice and Hero opposites? Are Benedick and Claudio? How do they differ in their reasoning and in their actions? How do they compare and contrast? Awesome. Okay, as laid out before we started the reading, again, here are some things to watch for in the play. Definitely people overhearing things, mishearing them, misunderstanding them, all that good stuff. Throughout the play, you'll also see men, in particular, mocking one another and making reference to horns or being cuckolded. A cuckold is a man whose wife has been unfaithful to him. And to show his shame, he wears a pair of horns on his head. This is kind of a representation that you see frequently at the time. The term comes from the cuckoo bird, which is a species of bird that lays their eggs in nests of other birds. And the imagery comes from the horns or antlers of a deer, a male deer, a stag, who they lose their mates if they lose a sparring match to another male. The term in the play, I think, overall could be described as good-natured, in jest. I think the overall tone of the play is jestful, but it really was a fear for men of the time, and something that they definitely maybe obsessed with a little bit. Maybe I'm coloring that with my own interpretations. But when Claudio believes that Hero has been unfaithful, his pride is wounded, and his entire worth is wrapped up in his social honor. And so the idea of marrying an unfaithful woman, would make him a cuckold, and would make him an object of ridicule amongst his friends and his superiors. So it's not even just about, the love of your life not being faithful to you. It's about your social standing. Literary terms. This one is just straight fun to say. Stickomythia. Quick change of single lines between two characters to create tension or urgency or funsies. Look for these between Beatrice and Benedict when they really start going at it. It's a great way to show off that very popular mode of slinging, stinging insults, and boy, does Shakespeare know how to write these insults. See if you can pick your favorite out of the play. Mine is, "You have such a February face, full of frost, of storm and cloudiness." That's a good one. I like that. The second is malapropisms, or outrageous misuses of words, especially words that sound alike. And these abound whenever Dogberry is present. I'm sure you've noticed, or at least been able to tell from reading the notes. But he'll show up in the second half of the play. We'll touch on that a little bit more next week. But be on the lookout for his verbal missteps. He's definitely the clown or the goofball of the play, the comedic relief, and his effort to use heightened language and to sound flowery and fancy like all of the lords and ladies that he's talking to, he falls quite short. He insults people when he intends to compliment them, and he compliments them when he intends to insult them. So listen for those fun mix-ups. Things like, "You are thought to be the most senseless and fit man for the constable of the watch," when obviously he doesn't mean senseless, he means sensible. Or he says, "Villain, thou will be condemned into everlasting redemption for this." Obviously he means condemnation, not redemption. But we get to enjoy him being kind of foolhardy in this way. Alright, anyway, moving on. Okay, so, thou versus you. I thought this might be a fun and helpful tip while we read. And it's one that nobody ever taught me. I had to find it out on my own, if you can believe it. It's definitely not necessary to understand the text, but if you do know, I think it opens the play up for a bit more interpretation and insight into the intentions of the characters and the different ways to play them. So, if you have studied French, Spanish, or Italian, or German at all in school, then you are probably familiar with the idea of the formal second tense, as in the polite, formal way to say you. In Spanish, it's usted. In French, it's vous. In Italian, it's voi or lei. And it can be used for one person or for a group. Then, of course, there's the singular, less formal way, which is actually tu in Spanish, Italian, and French. But here's the fun, crazy kicker. English used to have the same thing. Does that blow your mind? That blew my mind. I had no idea, and I didn't even learn this until grad school. So, you was the formal, and thou was the informal. I'm sorry, I'm not over it. Basically, you can use this chart here to kind of tell how they were used. You may or may not care at all, but I think it's worth considering, the ways that the characters interact with each other. And if they're breaking with any of these rules that are written here, why do you think they're doing that? What do you think it means? Are they overstepping their bounds? Are they being dismissive or derisive? Do they think they have a closer relationship than they do? There are a lot of different possibilities with this. And Khaki will continue to be fascinated until the end of time. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back. Next slide, Elizabethan marriage customs. A little bit of helpful background to know in this play, I think. Dating relationships and marriage obviously have changed quite a bit in the 100 years since Shakespeare wrote. And you can definitely see that in Much Ado About Nothing, as well as other plays that we'll read, and many that we won't, that you can still read. So we have laws today about marriage, but in Elizabethan England, they also had laws about dating and about engagements as well. There were also, on top of the laws themselves, there were very strict customs and expectations that you were expected to adhere to. So there really wasn't a ton of room for romance in a lot of situations, the way that we would consider it now. That's part of why, in these plays, the idea of being in love with the person that you're going to marry is a very wonderful and romantic one, and it's a very idealistic, happy ending kind of thing. Weddings themselves often served as business arrangements. Families would arrange to marry one of their children off to strengthen their social position, and because of that, arranged marriages were very, very common. In many circumstances, the bride and groom wouldn't meet until their wedding day. Fathers were allowed to marry their daughters off when they were just 7 years old, and at 12, a girl could consent to marriage on her own. Lucky her. It was legal for boys to marry at 14, although most of them waited for the age of consent and wouldn't marry until they were 21 or older. During the engagement or the betrothal period, the bride and groom's families would work out and carefully negotiate what you may have heard of the term, a dowry, which is obviously a gift of money or property from the bride's family to the groom, which was also very beneficial to her should the groom pass away before she did. Because once you married your husband, you were considered his property for all intents and purposes. And so this was something that she would, have upon his death. Betrothals could be terminated for a variety of reasons. Heresy, big old heretic that you are. Infidelity, serious physical dismemberment, or disfigurement, rather. Discovery of previous marriage contracts, wickedness, or drunkenness, and long separation of the couple were all reasons that had been used to break off an engagement. On the morning of a wedding, people would gather at the bride's house before heading to the church, and the wedding was a very solemn affair. But afterwards, there would be dancing and drinking and festivities, a lot like we have today. White wedding dresses did not exist. Women wore their best dresses that they had, or would purchase new ones if they could afford it, and sometimes they would wear a cloak as well. Lower class women would wear dresses made of cotton or wool, and they would tie flowers in their hair. Men would wear a suit that consisted of a doublet, a jerkin, hose, and a cloak and hat. All very nice and formal. Marriage for royals was usually, a necessity, but, sorry, there's a bug in here. It's driving me nuts. Okay, marriage for royals was usually a necessity, but we have our wonderful Queen Bess, or Queen Elizabeth, who never married, and that is how she became known as the Virgin Queen, because she had no hubby. She certainly had plenty of offers, believe you me, but she famously declared that she was married to England, and that England was her first priority. Her refusal to marry was honestly probably because she enjoyed ruling, and she didn't want to turn over her power and direct involvement to government, which would not be surprising to see happen if she had a husband at the time. So, yeah. I'm trying to find a nice way to say that her marriage would have diminished her role in governing significantly. But she did use the possibility of marriage as a diplomatic tactic for decades. Kind of dangling it out there like that, maybe kind of unspoken option type thing. But yeah, ultimately she reigned alone for the entirety of her tenure? For her tenure as queen. Anyway, enough. So, with enough exposition, we'll just get into the play already. Act 1. We open with a sense of relief because the war is over, and the gentlemen that are coming back are the victors, which is fantastic. And you get the contrast here between the soldiers of name and the poor soldiers with no name. They mentioned that. How many died? Few, sir, and none of name. You know, that idea. We know that Claudio was valiant in battle before we see him, that he has distinguished himself. And then we immediately see how sharp Beatrice's wit is, and how she feels about Benedict. She tells us that he doesn't have much wealth, and that and then she spars with the messenger about it. Has a new sworn brother every month. But when you first read this, when you first started the play, did you really feel like she hated him, or was she asking sarcastically about Signor Montanto because she was actually worried and wanted to know how he was and if he'd lived and all that? That's certainly a possibility. Then, as predicted, the soldiers arrive, and Don Pedro knows very much that Leonato putting them up is quite a cross. He says, "Good Signor Leonato, are you come to meet your trouble?" I'm sorry, I'm being Denzel Washington apparently in this. The fashion of the world is to avoid cost, and yet you encounter it. And Leonato says, "Never did trouble come to my house in the likeness of your grace," which is, you know, the correct response, but also a very nice one. In and amongst all these fun festivities, the end of the war, everybody coming home, the excitement, you get the first interaction between Benedict and Beatrice. They're very, very well matched in their sparring here, and we get to see the stichomythia right off the bat. But Benedict then cuts her off and ends their conversation. And she says, "You always end with a jade's trick," which a jade's trick is an ill-conditioned horse likely to drop out of the race before it ends. In the same way that Benedict kind of lamely drops out of the contest of wits. And she says, "I know you of old." So you definitely get the sense that they knew each other before. Then we get the introduction of Don John. He's been reconciled to the prince after launching a revolt against him and losing. So he says he's not a man of many words, which, you know, isn't necessarily a great thing in Shakespeare, to be a man of few words. So that's definitely telling, I think, early on. And then everybody leaves except for Claudio and Benedict. And Claudio asks him, "What do you think of Hero?" A little bit of high school gossip here. You know, what do you think of Hero? And turns out that what Benedict thinks of Hero isn't very much. He uses the chance then instead to mention Beatrice, saying, "You know, her cousin Beatrice is far lovelier, but it's too bad that she's so awful." Buddy, nobody was talking about her. But thanks for showing us that you were thinking about her. You can definitely also see here the difference between the way these two men talk. Claudio is very poetic and over the top. "Can the world buy such a jewel?" And Benedict is very cynical about women. He's like, "Yeah, and a case to put it in too." He's very concerned here that women will not be loyal. Touching again on that whole infidelity thing that we've mentioned as a major theme in this play. Don Pedro says to Claudio that he will court him for Claudio. Court Hero for Claudio, which, you know, hearkening back to our marriage custom slides, this makes sense, pardon, in that the prince, with a higher social standing, can more effectively work the business dealing. It also, you know, puts the relationship in the frame of a business class kind of deal rather than that of romance, because obviously then Claudio would woo for himself and use his words and his wily ways. He has a single wily way. Benedict, in the meantime, thinks that the whole affair is completely ridiculous and that he's going to live as a bachelor forever, so excuse the rest of y'all. Don Pedro says that he will, in time the savage bull doth bear the yoke, and Benedict makes a cuckold joke here. If ever I bear it, take the bull's horns and put them on my head. Again, the symbol of being a cuckold, saying that if I get married, I'm going to get cheated on, because you can't know for sure. And that's his argument, is that if you can't know for sure, then you might as well just consider yourself a cuckold. So, super positive. We're starting on a big up note here in this play. Don Pedro says that he swears before he dies, he'll see Benedict lovesick. And Benedict says, no, sick from any number of other things. But not love. Definitely not love. Which is, obviously, I think we can all tell at this point that he's going to be proved wrong. Okay. Bastards. In Act 1, Scene 3, we get a much closer look at Don John. What we'll see throughout Shakespeare's plays is that there are a lot of character tropes that are used. Much like TV's characters, today's TV characters, most of the cast of a play can be categorized into a different role. The first we'll look at right now is the natural villain, is what they'll call it. The bastard is what they refer to it as. A bastard does not mean a jerk or a bad dude. It straight up means born out of wedlock. They believed very much to be created with corrupt passion, because they were created out of a sense of lust rather than being within that marital construct. So they're naturally inclined to evil. So he's also kind of another example of what can happen when these fears of existing or things happening outside of a marriage, or of cheating and that sort of thing. Anyway, Don John hates his half brother Don Pedro, and why is that? Well, in Shakespeare's day, it may have been simply because he was a bastard, which these things, are obviously stereotypes, and you might have some sympathy for the characters because of that, and it's just sort of like, oh, he's a bad guy because of this, the end. But the other thing is that they rarely ever inherit anything from their parents. Being born out of the confines of wedding transactions that we just mentioned, especially if there's a legitimate heir like Don Pedro, means that he won't get anything in the will. And so he is forced to be a self-made man, and he could certainly be very, very bitter towards Don Pedro. And what we don't know is Don Pedro could very well be his younger brother. And then through no fault of his own, he's not left anything by his father. So let's look at what Don John says in Act 1, Scene 3. He's, like we've talked about, quite angry in disposition. He says, I'd rather be a canker, a weed, that's what a canker is, a weed, in a hedge, than a rose in my brother's grace. And it better fits my blood to be disdained of all than to fashion a carriage to rob love of any. Basically, it suits me better to put on a show to trick people into liking me, or it suits me better to just be disliked than to put on a show to try to get people to like me. In this, though I cannot be said to be a flattering, honest man, it must not be denied that I am a plain-dealing villain. So, at least, I'm not flattering, but at least I tell the truth. I'm the villain. I'll be honest with you. I am trusted with a muzzle and enfranchised with a clog. A clog is a heavy block of wood. And so I love that image. I'm trusted with a muzzle. I'm only trusted when I'm tied down, like a dog. Therefore, I have decreed not to sing in my cage. If I had my mouth, if my mouth were free, if it weren't muzzled, I would bite. If I had my liberty, I would do my liking. In the meantime, let me be that I am, and seek not to alter me. So, I think it's interesting to think about this in this description when we see other villains later on in other plays. How does Don John differ from them? Do you find him to be relatable at all? Do you find him to be complex or deep or interesting, or do Shakespeare's villains get more complex and more meaty as far as characteristics go, as character development goes, than this one? Is it interesting? Is it complex, or is it a shallow trope? Things to think about. Maybe yes, maybe no. Anyway, Don John goes on to say that Claudio took his place in his brother's favor when he fell, after his failed attempt at a takeover. So if he can make Claudio and his brother unhappy at all, he's in. If I can cross him anyway, I bless myself. If you are familiar, we're not doing it, but if you are familiar with the play Othello, you can also kind of compare Don John's villainy with Iago's. The later, which is thought to be one of the most interesting and one of the greatest, I guess, villains of that Shakespeare ever wrote. It's kind of the same plot, actually. A jaded military man trying to overthrow his superior by tricking them into thinking that their woman is unfaithful. Don John is bested, though, by Dogberry, which, again, we'll see later. But Iago, in Othello, which is a tragedy, is successful in getting Othello to kill his own wife, all over rumor and hearsay. So definitely differences, right, in a comedy and a tragedy. Anyway, the picture here with the quote is from Tumblr, and it's super made me laugh. It's Keanu Reeves playing Don John in Kenneth Branagh's movie, which is fantastic. It's the same performance that this week's clip is from, actually. So you should have seen a bit of that already. I highly recommend to go watch the movie if you haven't. It's like I said earlier, I believe it's got Denzel Washington in it as Don Pedro. So it's pretty darn cool. Okay. Act 2, Scene 1. Super duper long. Let's dive in. Here is the big dance scene where all of the men... Wait a second. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Ugh, I thought we jumped ahead. Where all the men wear masks and the women remain unmasked. So before it starts, when people know who each other are, Leonardo, Hero, and Beatrice are having a conversation about men and marriage, and how Beatrice does not want a husband. She tells Hero that if the intended man for her is not handsome, then she should tell her father that she doesn't want him. But she says it obviously in a fun, clever way. Father, as it please me. And Leonardo responds saying, Hero, darling, honey, apple of my eye, I've already told you what your answer will be if Claudio asks. So two very different little bits of advice from father and cousin. Beatrice, though, mentions that she wants a man with a good leg. Remember how we talked earlier in week 1 about men's calves being sexualized? Well, here you go. Here's an example of a dirty joke that involves a leg. And she says she wants a good foot, too. That is both a reference to being a good dancer and another sex joke. She rails against marriage the same way that Benedict did. Sorry, my mind just went off. And saying she doesn't want a man with a beard or a man without a beard. And that until men are made of some other metal than earth, she doesn't want a husband. Which seems about right now, because that's about the pickiest thing I've ever heard. Don Pedro, in the meantime, starts to woo Hero. And people are flirting, it's a party, it's a fun, great time, and we see Benedict in disguise, and he comes in and tells Beatrice, hey, I heard someone's been insulting you. They say you're disdainful, and they say that you get your wit from a book of jokes. And Beatrice says, oh, yeah, it must be Benedict who said this. Benedict then says, what? Who's he? What's he? And Beatrice says, oh, you don't know? He's the prince's gesture. He's a dull fool. A dull meaning, obviously not very bright. He both makes men laugh at him and then also angers them with his rudeness. I wish he were in the room right now. If only he had the guts to come say all that crap to my face. So that goes over super well. Meanwhile, Don John, in disguise, says to Claudio, oh, hey, I heard that the prince is actually wooing for himself, and that he's not planning on giving Hero to Claudio. Can you believe that? That's crazy. Claudio immediately says, goodbye, Hero, because he's a very gullible little monkey. There are also arguments here that because this deal is one of status, Don Pedro has much higher status and that he could woo for himself easily. Either way, both Don Pedro and Count Claudio are easy marks and very very gullible, to, I think, put it kindly. Anyway, Benedict comes and tries to get Claudio then to take him to the wooed hero because Don Pedro has successfully wooed her. But Claudio is sullen and grumpy and he storms off. So then that leaves Benedict alone. Alas, poor hurt fowl, he says. But Benedict then says, and though my lady Beatrice should know me and not know me. And he repeats verbatim what she told him. And is quite butthurt about the whole thing. About her tongue lashing of him. Anyway, then Don Pedro enters, and Benedict just starts going off on how awful Beatrice is, and says, I wouldn't marry her. I wouldn't marry her. Which, by the way, who was talking about marriage, Benedict? Nobody was saying that you should marry her. It's just you, dude. It's just you. Then they say, let's talk no more of this, and then they literally just keep talking about her, because why not? That's something interesting going on now that there's no more war, right? Talking about ladies, and ladies talking about men. That's basically what this play is. She shows up, though. Beatrice shows up, and he storms off because he's all angry and hurt. And then we can see, from what Beatrice says here, even more so now that they have a history. Don Pedro says that you have wounded him. And she says, indeed, my lord. Says, you've lost his heart, or something like that. And she says, indeed, my lord, he lent it me a while, and I gave him use for it, a double heart for his single one. Marry once before he won it of me with false dice, therefore your grace may well say that I have lost it. Which definitely, there's tons that you could pull out of there. But she then, brings in Claudio, who ran away, and Don Pedro gives him the wooed hero, and they have a really cute, touching moment. Beatrice then shows happiness at her cousin's match, and Don Pedro says, in faith, lady, you have a merry heart. They flirt a little bit, and Don Pedro asks if, will you have me, my lady, if she'll take him as a husband, and she treats it as a joke. But I guess it's up to you to determine if it is, The text doesn't really indicate. It never does. So the actors obviously must choose how to play it, and I've seen multiple productions. Joss Whedon plays it like a joke, and Kenneth Branagh plays it like he's being serious. So, two different options for sure. Anyway, Beatrice then says that she knows the truth about marriage, which is that it's painful for women, that her mother cried when she was born, but then a star danced, and under that was she born, crediting the star with her merry heart. She leaves then, and they all conspire to set the two of them up, which, well, we'll just see. How about that? Okay, Act 2, Scene 2. Don John basically finds out that his plan didn't work, but Borachio says, ooh, no, I got a great idea. I've got a maid that I can call on anytime that I like, and we can make it seem as though she is Hero. We'll just go up to Hero's bedroom, and we'll trick everybody into thinking that Margaret is Hero. John is very persistent in his plan against hurting Claudio and Don Pedro. So he's like, yes, I'm in. Whatever it is, let's do it. Okay, so then you get the trick. This is the super fun part, right? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I stalk on the foul sits. When he says this in this, he's indicating to us that Benedict has reacted to their trick, wherever he's hiding. There's a real lot of fun to be had with how this scene is staged, and I've definitely included this as one of the clips to watch for this week that you've seen, because I think this one does a really cute, good job. But there are tons of really good of ways to act this out, and I think I put a few extra in the extras folder, so you can check this out. But basically, of course, Benedict enters, and he's railing on women, delineates the traits of the woman that he wants. She'd be rich, she'd be pious, she'd be pretty, good dancer, musician, and her hair can be whatever color it pleases God. Oh, so it's so nice that you're not picky, Benny. So then the men come in, and he's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to deal with all their frou-frou, happy love crap. I'm gonna hide. And so they obviously know that he's done that, and they're very on board with him hiding himself. See you where Benedict hath hid himself. And then super loud, which doesn't have to be, but anyway. What was it you told me, that Benedict was in love? That Beatrice was in love with Signor Benedict? It would be remiss of me to say here that there's a bad way to do this. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in figuring out how you want this staged. I've seen multiple productions of it. It's very cute. To do that blocking, right? To show Benedict running around and keeping himself hidden from these guys who know where he is and are probably making it difficult for him to keep himself hidden on purpose, while continuing to trick him. And so they're like, no, don't tell him. He's too proud. She'll never admit it if anybody confronts her about it, because, she's got such a delicate heart, and he's just so cruel. She wouldn't want him to break it. And he's like, she loves me? Well, then it must be requited. And it's like, cool, dude, glad it was that easy for you. And he's like, I must not seem proud. I know, that I've always, when I said I would die a bachelor, I thought I wouldn't live long enough to be married. And so he's rationalizing his past phrases and his past, and his past ralliances against marriage and all that, which is really cute and a fun thing to stage. And then, of course, Beatrice comes in, and he says, I do spy some marks of love in her, and you can certainly bet that there are tons of adaptations where, of course, there are 0 marks of love in her at all. Against my will, I am I'm sent to bid you come into dinner. And he's like, there's double meaning in that. Super cute. Anyway, I'm getting all crazy with it. Anyway, so then we get the second half, which is Beatrice's trickery. And so, Hero says, go tell her that we're gossiping in the garden, and she'll totally show up to listen in. And when I talk about Benedict, I need you to go nutso and be like, oh yeah, that dude's so cool, he's the best, and make her realize that other people like him. So then they do sort of the same thing. Are you sure Benedict loves Beatrice so entirely? And of course then it's the same thing. You get to pick how you have Beatrice react to hearing this news. And so the two are talking, and it's the men want you to tell her, no, she'll make fun of him. You can't. She's She praises her wit above everything else. Even Benedict, who's definitely worth loving back, she'll just be mean and nasty, and he doesn't deserve that. And Beatrice is like, oh my gosh, can this be true? Stand I accused of scorn so much? Well, then I won't be. And Benedict, love on. They say you deserve it, and I know that it's true even more than they do. So again, it doesn't take long for her to change her tune either, and it's obviously I think you can tell that I like this scene quite a bit. Okay, so that wraps up this week, ending on a little bit of a cliffhanger. But as always, you know where to reach me. Reach out about anything you need, and I'm going to stop talking now.